The Hayes family mansion stood tall against the Boston skyline, its windows glowing with warm light as another charity gala was in full swing. Inside, Logan Hayes gritted his teeth as he endured yet another attempt by his mother to set him up with someone's daughter. "Darling, you simply must meet Catherine Vanderbilt," his mother Eleanor said, pulling him by the arm. "She just finished her master's at Harvard Business School." Logan, dressed in his perfectly tailored black suit, fought the urge to loosen his tie. At 35, he was tired of these games. His mother had paraded 15 different women in front of him this month alone. "Mother, I have a conference call in 5 minutes," he lied smoothly, already backing away from the ballroom. The crystal chandeliers and classical music were starting to give him a headache. "Logan Alexander Hayes," Eleanor's voice carried that warning tone he knew too well. "Your father and I aren't getting any younger. The Hayes fortune needs an heir." Logan. Kai escaped to his private office on the 3rd floor, closing the heavy wooden door behind him. He loosened his tie and poured himself a glass of scotch. The city lights twinkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but he barely noticed them anymore. His phone buzzed. A text from his younger sister Olivia. "Mom's on the warpath. She's planning to invite the Vanderbilts for Sunday brunch." Logan downed his scotch in one gulp. This had to stop. His family's obsession with his marriage status was affecting his work. Hayes Industries needed his full attention, not these constant interruptions about his personal life. Across town, in a small bookstore called Story Corner, Sophie Carter was adding up numbers for the 3rd time, hoping they would somehow change. They didn't. The rent was due in 2 weeks and she was short again. "We'll figure something out," she told her empty store, running her hand along the worn wooden shelves. This place had been her dream since she was a little girl, reading books, under her bed covers with a flashlight. Now, at 28, she was watching that dream slowly slip away. The bell above the door chimed. "Still open?" her best friend Maria asked, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Barely," Sophie answered, taking one of the cups gratefully. "I might have to start selling my organs soon." "Or you could just sell the store," Maria suggested, not for the first time. "That developer's offer is still on the table." Sophie shook her head. "This store was my mom's legacy. I'm not turning it into another soulless coffee chain." Maria sat on the counter, her designer outfit looking out of place among the dusty books. As a successful real estate agent, she lived in a different world than Sophie. "Then you need a miracle, honey, or a rich husband." Sophie laughed, but it wasn't funny. She'd already tried everything. Author events, children's reading hours, even a small coffee corner. Nothing brought in enough customers to compete with the big bookstore chains and online retailers. Back in his office, Logan was searching through his emails when an idea struck him. He dealt with business problems every day. Hostile takeovers, difficult negotiations, complex contracts. Why not apply the same principles to his personal life? He needed a solution that would keep his family off his back while allowing him to focus on what really mattered, running his company. He opened a new document and started typing requirements. Professional woman who can handle high society events. No emotional attachment, clear timeline and exit strategy. Mutual benefits. It was perfect. A business arrangement disguised as a romance. His family would finally leave him alone and he could work in peace. All he needed was the right candidate. The next morning, Sophie was arranging new releases in the window display when she saw the eviction notice. 30 days. Her hands shook as she read the letter again. This couldn't be happening. She called, Maria in tears. "They're selling the building. I have a month to clear out." "Come to lunch," Maria said firmly. "I think I might have a solution for you." Sophie looked around at her beloved bookstore, at the reading nook where children sat every Saturday morning, at the wall of photographs showing her mother with famous authors. She couldn't let it end like this. "Okay," she said. "But you're buying." Neither Sophie nor Logan knew it yet, but their worlds were about to collide in ways neither of them could have predicted. And what would start as a simple business arrangement would turn into something that no contract could ever contain. Maria took Sophie to an expensive restaurant in downtown Boston, the kind of place where Sophie would normally feel out of place in her simple dress and worn shoes. But today, She was too worried about her store to care about the judging looks from the other diners. "So, what's this solution you mentioned?" Sophie asked, picking at her salad. Maria leaned forward, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her water glass. "You know I handle real estate for some very important clients, right?" Sophie nodded. Maria was always talking about her wealthy clients and their million-dollar properties. "Well, I just heard something interesting about Logan Hayes." "The Logan Hayes? Of Hayes Industries?" Sophie had seen him in the newspapers. He was always in the business section, making deals and buying companies. "The very same," Maria smiled. "And he needs a girlfriend." Sophie almost choked on her water. "What?" "Not a real girlfriend," Maria explained quickly. "He needs someone to pretend to be his girlfriend, to get his family off his back about marriage, and he's willing to pay very well for it." Sophie stared at her friend like she had lost her mind. "This isn't one of those romantic comedies we watch on girls' night, Maria. This is real life." "I'm serious." Maria pulled out her phone and showed Sophie a confidential email. "His family is driving him crazy with matchmaking attempts. He wants to hire someone to pose as his girlfriend for 6 months, someone professional, discreet, and—" Maria paused for effect. "In need of financial assistance." Sophie's mind went to the eviction notice in her purse, to her empty store and mounting bills. "How much?" "Enough to save your store and keep it running for years." Meanwhile, in his corner office at Hayes Industries, Logan was reviewing applications. His assistant had quietly put out feelers through trusted channels, looking for suitable candidates. But none of them seemed right. Either they were too eager to turn the fake relationship real, or they didn't have the sophistication needed to convince his family. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Hayes, Maria Rodriguez from Elite Properties is here." "To see you." Logan frowned. He wasn't expecting any real estate agents today. "Send her in." Maria walked in with the confidence of someone who regularly dealt with the wealthy and powerful. "Mr. Hayes, thank you for seeing me on such short notice." "What can I do for you, Ms. Rodriguez?" "I heard through certain channels that you're looking for a particular type of arrangement," Maria said carefully, "and I think I know someone perfect for the role." Logan's expression didn't change, but he gestured for her to continue. "She's intelligent, well-educated, owns her own business, a bookstore. She's beautiful, but not in that obvious way that screams gold digger. And most importantly, she's in a situation where a mutual arrangement would be beneficial." Logan leaned back in his chair. "And you're telling me this because—" "Because Sophie Carter is my best friend, and I know she would be perfect for what you need. She's struggling to save her bookstore, which gives her motivation to maintain the arrangement professionally. She's naturally charming. Your mother would love her, and she has no interest in actually trapping a rich husband." Logan pulled up a search engine on his computer. "Sophie Carter, Story Corner Bookstore?" "That's her," Maria confirmed. "The store's been in her family for generations. It's her whole life." Logan looked at the store's website. The homepage showed a smiling young woman with warm brown eyes and natural beauty, reading to a group of children. She looked real, not like the polished socialites his mother kept throwing at him. "Arrange a meeting," he said finally. "Tomorrow, neutral location." The next day, Sophie sat nervously in a quiet cafe, wearing the best outfit she owned, which wasn't saying much. She still couldn't believe she was considering this crazy plan. But when she thought about losing her store, about disappointing her mother's memory, she knew she had to at least hear him out. The bell above the door chimed and Sophie's heart stopped. Logan Hayes was even more impressive in person than in photographs. Tall, with dark hair and piercing blue eyes, he carried himself with the confidence that came from a lifetime of wealth and power. Several heads turned as he walked to her table. "Ms. Carter," he said, sitting down across from her. "I understand we might be able to help each other." Sophie straightened her spine. She might not be rich, but she had her pride. "That depends, Mr. Hayes. What exactly are you proposing?" Logan studied her for a moment. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated. He seemed to approve of this. "I need someone to pose as my girlfriend for 6 months," he said directly. "Attend events, meet my family, create a convincing relationship. In return, I'll ensure your bookstore not only survives, but thrives. And what happens after 6 months? We have a civilized public breakup. You keep the money, I get my family off my back, everyone wins. Sophie took a sip of her coffee to hide her nerves. And what makes you think I can convince people I'm dating a billionaire? Because you're not trying to convince anyone you're dating a billionaire, Logan replied. You're just being yourself, a bookstore owner who happened to meet and connect with Logan Hayes, the man, not the bank account. Sophie thought about her store, about the children who came for story time every week, about her mother's dream. I want everything in writing, clear terms, clear boundaries. Logan's lips curved slightly. Of course, I'll have my lawyers draw up a contract. And I want my own lawyer to review it, Sophie added. This time Logan actually smiled. I would expect nothing less. As they shook hands across the table, neither of them realized they had just set in motion events that would change both their lives forever. Sometimes the best love stories start with a contract, not a kiss. 3 days later, Sophie sat in Logan's office, reading through the contract with her lawyer, Sarah Johnson. The office was bigger than her entire bookstore, with views that made her a little dizzy if she looked down too long. This all seems straightforward, Sarah said, flipping through the pages. 6 months of public appearances, social events, family, gatherings. A monthly payment that would make most people faint, plus additional funds to renovate and sustain your bookstore. Sophie nodded, trying to stay calm. The amount of money involved was more than she'd ever seen in her life. There's also a detailed confidentiality agreement, Sarah continued. You can never reveal the true nature of your relationship with Mr. Hayes. That's fine, Sophie said. It's not like anyone would believe her anyway. Logan sat behind his massive desk, watching them with those intense blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. His lawyer, a stern-looking man named Richardson, stood nearby. Are we ready to proceed? Logan asked. Sophie took a deep breath and signed her name on every marked page. Logan did the same. Just like that, she was officially the fake girlfriend of one of Boston's most eligible bachelors. We should start with something small, Logan said after the lawyers left. Dinner at a popular restaurant where we'll be seen. Tomorrow night? Tomorrow? Sophie's voice squeaked a little. I need something to wear. I can't show up looking like this. She gestured at her simple dress. Logan pressed a button on his phone. Amanda, please come in. A stylish young woman entered the office. Yes, Mr. Hayes. Ms. Carter needs a complete wardrobe suitable for her new position in my life. Take her shopping. Use my personal account. Sophie started to protest, but Logan cut her off. This is part of the arrangement, Sophie. You need to look the part. 4 hours later, Sophie collapsed on her small couch at home, surrounded by shopping bags from stores she'd never dared enter before. Amanda had been ruthlessly efficient, selecting designer clothes, shoes, and accessories that somehow made Sophie look like she belonged in Logan's world, while still feeling like herself. So this is really happening, she told her empty apartment. Her cat Romeo meowed in response. The next evening, Logan picked her up in a car that cost more than her entire life savings. She wore a simple but elegant black dress that Amanda had chosen, her hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. Logan's eyes widened slightly when she opened the door. You clean up well, Ms. Carter. You sound surprised, Mr. Hayes. He actually smiled at that. Not surprised, impressed. The restaurant was exactly as fancy as Sophie had feared, but something strange happened as the evening progressed. Despite the contract between them, despite the fact that this was all pretend, she found herself actually enjoying Logan's company. He was smart, with a dry sense of humor that surprised her, and he actually listened when she talked about books and her store, asking intelligent questions that showed real interest. So why a bookstore, he asked over dessert. With your education, you could have chosen an easier path. Sophie played with her chocolate mousse. My mom opened that store when I was 5. Some of my best memories are of sitting in the reading corner while she worked. After she died, keeping it going just felt right. Logan's expression softened, slightly. And your father? Left when I was 2. It was always just Mom and me. A photographer stopped by their table, asking for a picture. Logan smoothly moved his chair closer to Sophie, placing his hand over hers on the table. Her skin tingled where he touched her. Smile, he whispered. "We're madly in love." The next morning, their photo was in every society column in Boston. "Logan Hayes off the market," the headline screamed. "Mystery woman captures city's most eligible bachelor." Sophie's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Maria called first. "Girl, you look amazing in that picture. And the way he's looking at you. If I didn't know better, I'd think it was real." But it was the call from Logan that made her nervous. "My mother saw the photos," he said without preamble. "She's insisting you come to Sunday brunch this weekend." Sophie's stomach dropped. "Already? Isn't it too soon?" "Actually, it's perfect timing." "But Sophie, my mother is not an easy woman. Are you ready for this?" She thought about her store, about all the reasons she'd agreed to this arrangement. "I can handle it." "Good. Because this is where the real performance begins." Sunday arrived too quickly. Sophie stood in front of her mirror, wearing a conservative but fashionable dress that Amanda had chosen. Her hands shook as she put on her earrings. Logan picked her up early. In the car, he briefed her on his family. "My father, Alexander, is semi-retired but still chairman of the board. Mother runs every charity in Boston. My sister Olivia is the only normal one, but she's away, in Europe. Watch out for my Aunt Margaret. She'll try to trap you with questions about your family background." Sophie's anxiety must have shown on her face because Logan reached over and squeezed her hand. "Just be yourself," he said softly. "That's why I chose you." The Hayes mansion was like something out of a movie. As they walked up the grand entrance steps, Sophie whispered, "If I embarrass myself, I'm taking you down with me." Logan actually laughed, a real laugh that transformed his usually serious face. "I'm counting on it." Neither of them realized it yet, but at that moment, something shifted between them. Something that no contract could have predicted or controlled. Eleanor. Hayes stood at the top of the mansion's grand staircase, looking every bit the society queen in her designer suit. Her eyes scanned Sophie from head to toe, taking in every detail. "So, you're the young woman who's captured my son's attention," Eleanor said, her voice cool and measured. Sophie smiled warmly, remembering Logan's advice to just be herself. "It's wonderful to meet you, Mrs. Hayes. Your home is beautiful." "Yes, it's been in the Hayes family for 4 generations, Eleanor replied, emphasizing the family history. "Logan, darling, the Vanderbilts were so disappointed you missed their gala last week." Logan's hand tightened on Sophie's waist. "I was having dinner with Sophie that evening, Mother. Much more enjoyable." Eleanor's lips tightened slightly, but she led them into the formal dining room. The table could have seated 20, but today it was set for 6. Logan's father, Alexander Hayes, sat at the head of the table, reading a financial newspaper. Aunt Margaret was already there, along with Logan's cousin Patricia. "Father," Logan said, "I'd like you to meet Sophie Carter." Alexander Hayes looked up, his steel-gray eyes sharp and assessing. "Ah yes, the bookstore owner. Interesting choice, son." Sophie felt Logan tense beside her but kept her smile steady. "Mr. Hayes, I just finished reading your biography. Your strategy during the financial crisis of 2008 was fascinating." Alexander's eyebrows rose slightly. "You've read my biography?" "Sophie reads everything," Logan said, pulling out her chair. "She's probably the most well-read person I know." "Her bookstore," Aunt Margaret cut in, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "How quaint. And your family, dear, what do they do?" Sophie met the older woman's gaze directly. "My mother was a teacher before she opened the bookstore. She believed that books could change lives. After she passed away, I took over the store to continue her legacy." "And your father?" Margaret pressed. "Never had the pleasure of knowing him," Sophie replied honestly. "But my mother was more than enough family for me." Eleanor nearly choked on her mimosa. Having a fatherless shopgirl dating her son clearly wasn't part of her plan, but Alexander Hayes was looking at Sophie with new interest. "Legacy is important. Not many young people understand that anymore." The servers brought out the first course, and Sophie was grateful for the distraction. She'd never seen so many forks in her life, but remembered Amanda's crash course in formal dining. "So tell us," Eleanor said between delicate bites of her salad, "how exactly did you and Logan meet?" "It seems rather sudden." Logan started to speak, but Sophie jumped in with the story they'd practiced. I was doing a children's reading hour at my store. Logan came in looking for a book for his niece. She turned to him with a genuine smile, remembering their cover story. He looked so lost in the children's section. I wasn't lost, Logan protested, playing along. I was just being thorough. You were holding a board book meant for toddlers. Your niece is 12. Logan's father actually chuckled. That sounds like Logan. All business sense, no practical knowledge. Exactly, Sophie agreed. So I helped him find an appropriate book and we got talking. Turns out we both love classic literature. He asked me to dinner to continue our discussion about Dickens and, well, she looked at Logan with what she hoped was the right mixture of affection and shyness. Logan's eyes met hers, and something in his expression made her heart skip. He was either a very good actor or a bookstore romance, Patricia said dreamily. How romantic. Indeed, Eleanor said flatly. Logan, darling, have you shown Sophie the new yacht yet? The Vanderbilts were quite impressed when they saw it. Last month. Mother, Logan's voice held a warning. We're not here to discuss the Vanderbilts. The rest of brunch passed in a similar fashion, with Eleanor making pointed references to other suitable women, while Alexander surprisingly engaged Sophie in discussions about business and literature. After dessert, Logan excused them, claiming he had work to review. In the car, Sophie finally let out the breath she'd been holding. That was intense, she said. Your mother really doesn't like me. On the contrary, Logan replied, looking amused. She's terrified because she does like you despite herself. And my father actually smiled. Twice. That hasn't happened at a family brunch since 2019. Sophie laughed, then noticed they weren't heading toward her apartment. Where are we going? I thought we could stop by your store. I'd like to see what we're investing in. The store was closed on Sundays, but Sophie always came in to do paperwork. When she unlocked the door, the familiar smell of books and wood polish welcomed her. Logan walked in slowly, taking everything in. His expensive suit looked out of place among the worn shelves and comfortable reading chairs, but something in his expression softened as he explored. It's not much, Sophie said, suddenly self-conscious. But every book has a story beyond the one printed on its pages. That coffee stain, from when a customer was so excited about finding a rare first edition that he spilled his drink. Those cushions are worn because children sit there every Saturday morning lost in stories. Logan picked up a book from the nearest shelf, running his fingers along its spine. My mother used to read to me when I was very young, he said quietly. Before the business took over everything. I'd forgotten that. Something passed between them then, something real and unexpected. Sophie found herself wanting to reach out, to touch his hand, to... Her phone buzzed, breaking the moment. It was a text from Maria. You're all over social media. Boston's power couple is trending. Reality crashed back. This wasn't real, it was a business arrangement, nothing more. Sophie couldn't afford to forget that, no matter how genuine Logan's smile looked when he discovered the classic literature section, or how natural it felt when he took her hand at brunch. But as she watched him explore her store with genuine interest, Sophie realized she might be in trouble, because pretending to fall in love with Logan Hayes was turning out to be dangerously easy. Eleanor Hayes stood at the top of the mansion's grand staircase, looking every bit the society queen in her designer suit. Her eyes scanned Sophie from head to toe, taking in every detail. So you're the young woman who's captured my son's attention, Eleanor said, her voice cool and measured. Sophie smiled warmly, remembering Logan's advice to just be herself. It's wonderful to meet you, Mrs. Hayes. Your home is beautiful. Yes, it's been in the Hayes family for 4 generations, Eleanor replied, emphasizing the family history. Logan, darling, the Vanderbilts were so disappointed you missed their gala last week. Logan's hand tightened on Sophie's waist. I was having dinner with Sophie that evening, Mother. Much more enjoyable. Eleanor's lips tightened slightly, but she led them into the formal dining room. The table could have seated 20, but today it was set for 6. Logan's father, Alexander Hayes, sat at the head of the table reading a financial newspaper. Aunt Margaret was already there, along with Logan's cousin Patricia. Father, Logan said, I'd like you to meet Sophie Carter. Alexander Hayes looked up, his steel-gray eyes sharp and assessing. Ah yes, the bookstore owner. Interesting choice, son. Sophie felt Logan tense beside her but kept her smile steady. "Mr. Hayes, I just finished reading your biography. Your strategy during the financial crisis of 2008 was fascinating." Alexander's eyebrows rose slightly. "You've read my biography?" "Sophie reads everything," Logan said, pulling out her chair. "She's probably the most well-read person I know." "A bookstore," Aunt Margaret cut in, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "How quaint. And your family, dear? What do they do?" Sophie met the older woman's gaze directly. "My mother was a teacher before she opened the bookstore. She believed that books could change lives. After she passed away, I took over the store to continue her legacy." "And your father?" Margaret pressed. "Never had the pleasure of knowing him," Sophie replied honestly. "But my mother was more than enough family for me." Eleanor nearly choked on her mimosa. Having a fatherless shopgirl dating her son clearly wasn't part of her plan. But Alexander Hayes was looking at Sophie with new interest. "Legacy is important. Not many young people understand that anymore." The servers brought out the first course, and Sophie was grateful for the distraction. She'd never seen so many forks in her life, but remembered Amanda's crash course in formal dining. "So tell us," Eleanor said between delicate bites of her salad, "how exactly did you and Logan meet? It seems rather sudden." Logan started to speak, but Sophie jumped in with the story they'd practiced. "I was doing a children's reading hour at my store. Logan came in looking for a book for his niece." She turned to him with a genuine smile, remembering their cover story. "He looked so lost in the children's section." "I wasn't lost," Logan protested, playing along. "I was just being thorough. You were holding a board book meant for toddlers. Your niece is 12. Logan's father actually chuckled. "That sounds like Logan. All business sense, no practical knowledge." "Exactly," Sophie agreed. "So I helped him find an appropriate book and we got talking. Turns out we both love classic literature. He asked me to dinner to continue our discussion about Dickens and, well," she looked at Logan with what she hoped was the right mixture of affection and shyness. Logan's eyes met hers, and something in his expression made her heart skip. He was either a very good actor or a bookstore romance, Patricia said dreamily. "How romantic." "Indeed," Eleanor said flatly. "Logan, darling, have you shown Sophie the new yacht yet? The Vanderbilts were quite impressed when they saw it last month." "Mother," Logan's voice held a warning. "We're not here to discuss the Vanderbilts." The rest of brunch passed in a similar fashion, with Eleanor making pointed references to other suitable women, while Alexander surprisingly engaged Sophie in discussions about business and literature. After dessert, Logan excused them, claiming he had work to review. In the car, Sophie finally let out the breath she'd been holding. "That was intense," she said. "Your mother really doesn't like me." "On the contrary," Logan replied, looking amused. "She's terrified because she does like you despite herself." And my father actually smiled. Twice. That hasn't happened at a family brunch since 2019. Sophie laughed, then noticed they weren't heading toward her apartment. "Where are we going?" "I thought we could stop by your store. I'd like to see what we're investing in." The store was closed on Sundays, but Sophie always came in to do paperwork. When she unlocked the door, the familiar smell of books and wood polish welcomed her. Logan walked in slowly, taking everything in. His expensive suit looked out of place among the worn shelves and comfortable reading chairs, but something in his expression softened as he explored. "It's not much," Sophie said, suddenly self-conscious, "but every book has a story beyond the one printed on its pages. That coffee stain? From when a customer was so excited about finding a rare first edition that he spilled his drink. Those cushions are worn because children sit there every Saturday morning lost in stories." Logan picked up a book from the nearest shelf, running his fingers along its spine. "My mother used to read to me when I was very young," he said quietly. "Before the business took over everything. I'd forgotten that." Something passed between them then, something real and unexpected. Sophie found herself wanting to reach out, to touch his hand, Her phone buzzed, breaking the moment. It was a text from Maria. "You're all over social media. Boston's power couple is trending." Reality crashed back. This wasn't real, it was a business arrangement, nothing more. Sophie couldn't afford to forget that, no matter how genuine Logan's smile looked when he discovered the classic literature section, or how natural it felt when he took her hand at brunch. But as she watched him explore her store with genuine interest, Sophie realized she might be in trouble, because pretending to fall in love with Logan Hayes was turning out to be dangerously easy. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of public appearances and private moments that felt increasingly less fake. Logan started dropping by the bookstore regularly, usually with coffee and pastries in hand. He claimed it was to maintain their cover story, but Sophie noticed he always seemed to arrive during the children's reading hour. One Saturday morning, she looked up from her reading of The Little Prince to find Logan sitting in the back, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. The children were sprawled on cushions around her, completely absorbed in the story. "And now here is my secret," Sophie read, her voice gentle. "It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye." After the children left, Logan helped her straighten up the reading corner. "You're good with them," he said, picking up scattered cushions. "They remind me of myself at that age," Sophie replied. "Books were my escape, my adventure." "Is that why you won't sell? Even though keeping this place is such a struggle?" Sophie paused in her cleaning. "Would you sell Hayes Industries just because someone offered you enough money?" "That's different. Hayes Industries is worth billions, and this store is worth everything to me." Sophie faced him. "Money isn't always the most important thing. Logan?" He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'm beginning to understand that." The renovation crew arrived the following week, updating the store while carefully preserving its character. Sophie watched in amazement as her beloved shop was transformed. New shelves, better lighting, a proper coffee corner, and a cozy event space took shape under her direction. "The contractor says they'll be done by Friday," Logan told her over dinner at his penthouse. They'd started having private dinners between public appearances, claiming they needed to work on their story. Just in time for the Hayes Foundation charity ball, Sophie nearly choked on her wine. "The what?" "The annual charity ball," Logan said, looking amused at her reaction. "The biggest social event of the season. Everyone who's anyone in Boston will be there." "Logan, I can't dance. I'll embarrass you in front of everyone." He stood up and held out his hand. "Then we better start practicing." Before Sophie could protest, he pulled her to her feet and into his arms. Soft music filled the room. He must have used a remote to start it. "Just follow my lead," he said softly, one hand on her waist, the other holding hers. "It's like reading. You just need to feel the rhythm." They moved slowly around his living room, the city lights twinkling through the windows. Sophie tried to focus on the steps, but all she could think about was how close they were, how his cologne smelled like pine and ocean, how his hand felt warm through the thin fabric of her dress. "See?" Logan's voice was low, intimate. "You're a natural." Sophie looked up at him, ready to make a joke about stepping on his feet, but the words died in her throat. The way he was looking at her, it couldn't be part of the act, could it? The music ended, but they didn't move apart. For a moment, Sophie thought he might kiss her. For a moment, she wanted him to. Then his phone rang, shattering the moment. Logan stepped away, checking the screen. "It's my father. I need to take this." Sophie gathered her things quickly. "I should go anyway. Early delivery tomorrow." In the elevator down to her waiting car, Logan insisted on providing a driver. Sophie pressed her cool hands to her flushed cheeks. This was getting dangerous. She was starting to forget this wasn't real, but the next day brought a sharp reminder of reality. Sophie was sorting through new arrivals when she overheard two customers talking. "Did you see the article about Logan Hayes' new girlfriend? Apparently she owns this store." "Please. It's obviously a publicity stunt. Hayes Industries stock dropped last quarter. What better way to distract investors than a romantic story about the CEO dating a common shopkeeper?" Sophie's hands shook as she shelved books, trying not to listen. "I give it 6 months tops. Men like Logan Hayes don't marry bookstore owners." 6 months, exactly the length of their contract. Sophie felt sick. That evening, she had to attend A dinner at the Hayes mansion. Eleanor had invited several of her charity board members, all of whom watched Sophie like hawks looking for mistakes. "Sophie, dear," Eleanor said during dessert, her voice carrying across the table, "tell us about your plans for the future. Surely you don't intend to run that little shop forever." Before Sophie could answer, Logan spoke up. "The store is doing extremely well, Mother. Sophie's business acumen is impressive." "Of course, darling," Eleanor smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I just wonder if she might be interested in more fulfilling pursuits. The Hayes Family Foundation always needs volunteers." "I find helping children discover the joy of reading very fulfilling," Sophie replied politely. "But I'd love to hear more about the foundation's work." Logan's hand found hers under the table and squeezed. She'd given the perfect response, polite but firm. Later, as they walked in the mansion's garden, Logan seemed distracted. "You handled my mother beautifully. I'm getting better at pretending," Sophie said, trying to ignore how much that hurt to say. Logan stopped walking and turned to face her. "Sophie," but whatever he was going to say was interrupted by the arrival of his sister Olivia, just returned. "From Europe." "Logan," Olivia rushed toward them, "and you must be Sophie. I've been dying to meet the woman who's finally caught my brother's interest." Sophie pasted on a smile, playing her role perfectly, but inside her heart was breaking. Because the women at the bookstore were right, this would end in exactly 6 months. And despite all her promises to herself, despite the contract sitting in her desk drawer, she was falling in love with Logan Hayes. The night of the Hayes Foundation charity ball arrived too quickly. Sophie stood in front of her mirror, barely recognizing herself in the midnight blue gown Logan's stylist had chosen. The dress made her feel like a princess, which only reminded her that this was all just a modern fairy tale with an expiration date. "You can do this," she told her reflection. "Just keep pretending." The ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton was transformed into a winter wonderland with crystal decorations, catching the light like ice. When Logan saw her, he actually stopped mid-conversation with a business associate. "You look beautiful," he said softly, taking her hand. "You don't clean up too badly yourself," she replied, trying to keep her voice light despite the butterflies. In her stomach, Eleanor Hayes was in her element, moving from group to group, making introductions and securing donations. She even managed a genuine-looking smile when she introduced Sophie to the governor. "Logan's girlfriend is doing wonderful things with that charming little bookstore," Eleanor said, her voice honey-sweet. "Such a quaint business." "Actually," Logan cut in, "Sophie just launched a literacy program for underprivileged children. She's partnering with 3 local schools." The governor's wife looked impressed. "Really? We should talk about expanding that program statewide." Sophie noticed. Eleanor's smile tightened slightly. Nothing was going according to the older woman's plan. Sophie was supposed to be an embarrassment, someone Logan would quickly tire of. Instead, she was winning people over. "May I have this dance?" Logan asked as the orchestra began playing. Their dance lessons paid off. Sophie moved confidently in Logan's arms, no longer worried about stepping on his feet, but being this close to him was its own kind of torture. "Everyone's watching us," she whispered. "Let them watch," Logan replied, his eyes never leaving her face. "You're the only person in this room worth looking at." Sophie's heart skipped. He was too good at this, at making it feel real. "Logan, darling?" A stunning blonde in a red dress approached them. "I thought that was you." Sophie felt Logan tense. "Rebecca, I didn't know you were back in Boston." "Just flew in from Paris," Rebecca said, ignoring Sophie completely. "Daddy's company is looking to partner with Hayes Industries. We simply must catch up." Sophie recognized her from the society pages. Rebecca Sinclair, Logan's ex-girlfriend. The one everyone had expected him to marry. "Sophie," Rebecca finally acknowledged her, "would you mind if I stole Logan for a dance? For old time's sake?" Before Sophie could respond, Logan's arm tightened around her waist. "Sorry, Rebecca, I'm dancing with my girlfriend." Rebecca's perfect smile faltered slightly. "Of course, some other time then." As she walked away, Sophie let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "She's gorgeous. She's exactly the kind of woman my mother wanted me to marry," Logan said. "Beautiful, wealthy, perfect social pedigree." Why didn't you? Logan was quiet for a moment. Because it would have been just another business deal, like this was supposed to be. Sophie's heart stopped. Was supposed to be. What did that mean? But before she could ask, Logan's sister Olivia rushed up to them looking worried. Logan, we have a problem. Rebecca's father is telling everyone he's buying controlling interest in Hayes Industries. He says he has inside information about the company's financial troubles. Logan's face hardened. Excuse me, ladies, I need to handle this. Sophie watched him walk away, her stomach churning. She knew Hayes Industries had been struggling lately. It was in all the business news. But Logan never talked about it. Olivia linked her arm through Sophie's. Come on, let's get a drink. I have a feeling you need to know what you're really up against. They found a quiet corner near the terrace. Olivia sipped her champagne, watching the crowd. Hayes Industries is vulnerable right now, she said quietly. Logan made some risky investments that haven't paid off. Rebecca's father, James Sinclair, has been trying to take over the company for years. Why are you telling me this? Olivia turned to face her. Because I've never seen my brother look at anyone the way he looks at you. But if Sinclair succeeds, Logan will lose everything, the company, his position, our father's legacy. And I'm afraid he might push you away to protect you from the fallout. Sophie's mind raced. The timeline matched perfectly. Logan had sought out their arrangement just as the company's troubles were becoming public. Was she just a distraction? A smokescreen to hide the real problems? Olivia, there's something you should know. But before she could confess about the contract, she saw Logan returning. His face was tight with anger. We're leaving, he said. Shortly. Now. In the car, Logan was silent, his jaw clenched. Sophie wanted to reach for his hand, to offer comfort, but she didn't know if she had that right anymore. How bad is it? She finally asked. Sinclair has been buying up shares through shell companies, Logan said, his voice rough. He's close to having enough for a hostile takeover. If that happens, you'll fight it, Sophie said firmly. You're Logan Hayes. You don't give up. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Why do you care? He asked softly. This isn't real, remember? It's just a contract. Sophie felt tears threatening. Is it? Is that all this is? The car stopped in front of her apartment building. Logan got out to walk her to her door, both of them silent with words they couldn't say. At her doorstep, Logan suddenly pulled her close and kissed her. It wasn't for show. There were no cameras, no audience. It was real and desperate and everything Sophie had been dreaming of. When they finally broke apart, Logan rested his forehead against hers. I can't drag you into this mess. You deserve better. Logan. Good night, Sophie, he said and walked away, leaving her standing there with swollen lips and a breaking heart. Inside her apartment, Sophie found her copy of the contract and read it again through tears. There it was in black and white. Their relationship was a business arrangement, nothing more. But somehow, without meaning to, they'd broken the most important rule. They'd fallen in love for real. The next morning, Sophie couldn't concentrate on anything. The kiss kept playing over and over in her mind. The bookstore was busy with its usual Saturday crowd, but she moved through her tasks like a robot, her thoughts far away. Earth to Sophie. Maria waved her hand in front of Sophie's face. I've been trying to get your attention for 5 minutes. Sorry, Sophie said, straightening books that didn't need straightening. I'm just distracted. I can see that. It wouldn't have anything to do with the photos of you and Logan Hayes looking cozy at last night's charity ball, would it? Sophie's hands froze on the books. What photos? Maria pulled up a gossip website on her phone. There they were, dancing. Close, looking at each other like they were the only people in the room. The headline read, Hayes are in love. Sources say it's the real deal. The thing is, Maria said slowly, you don't look like you're pretending in these photos. Sophie sat heavily in her reading chair. I'm in trouble, Maria. You're falling for him for real, aren't you? Worse, I think he might be falling for me too. Maria's eyes widened. And that's bad because his company is in crisis, and I'm just a distraction. A publicity stunt to keep people from looking too closely at Hayes Industries' problems. Are you sure about that? Before Sophie could answer, her phone buzzed with a text from Logan. Turn on the business news, now. Sophie grabbed the remote. For the small TV she kept in the office for children's movie events. The news wasn't good. Breaking news in the business world, the anchor was saying. Hayes Industries stocks plummeted this morning, following rumors of a hostile takeover bid by Sinclair Enterprises. Sources say James Sinclair has been quietly acquiring shares through various shell companies. Sophie's phone buzzed again. This time it was Eleanor Hayes. "We need to talk," the message read. "Come to the mansion. Alone." Sophie's stomach churned, but she knew she had to go. She asked Maria to watch the store and called Logan's driver. The Hayes mansion looked different in daylight, less magical and more intimidating. Eleanor was waiting in her private sitting room, impeccably dressed despite it being Saturday morning. "Sit down, dear," she said, gesturing to an antique chair. "Would you like some tea?" "Why am I here, Mrs. Hayes?" Eleanor's polite mask slipped slightly. "You're here because my son is about to lose everything his grandfather and father built. And you're going to help prevent that. How? By ending your relationship with him." Sophie felt like she'd been slapped. "Excuse me?" "Don't play innocent," Eleanor said sharply. "I know about the contract. I know my son hired you to play a part, and now things have gotten complicated." Sophie's blood ran cold. "How did you find out?" "I have my sources. The question is, what are you planning to do with this information? How much will it take to buy your silence?" "I would never hurt Logan like that." "My dear," Eleanor's voice was cold, "you're hurting him by staying. Logan needs to focus on saving the company. He needs to consider a merger with Sinclair Enterprises, which means he needs to reconcile with Rebecca. Your presence complicates things." "A merger?" Sophie felt sick. "You want him to marry Rebecca to save the company?" "I want him to do whatever is necessary to protect our family legacy. Surely you can understand that. After all, isn't that why you keep that little bookstore of yours?" Sophie stood up, her legs shaking. "The difference is, Mrs. Hayes, that my mother's legacy was about bringing joy and knowledge to people, not about power and money." "How naive you are," Eleanor smiled without warmth. "Do you think Logan will thank you when he loses everything? Do you think your little romance can survive that?" Before Sophie could respond, the door opened and Alexander Hayes walked in. "Eleanor," he said sharply, "what are you doing? Protecting our son? By threatening the woman he loves?" Alexander turned to Sophie. "I apologize for my wife's behavior. Please don't leave yet. There's something you need to know." Sophie sat back down, her head spinning. Alexander Hayes settled into a chair, looking tired. "Hayes Industries is more than just a company," he began. "It started as a small bookshop, did you know that? My grandfather sold books door to door during the Depression. He believed that even in the hardest times, people needed stories." Sophie hadn't known that. She'd never read that in any of the company histories. "The company grew and changed," Alexander continued, "but that spirit of believing in something bigger than profit, that's what made us special. That's what Logan was trying to bring back before all this trouble started." "I don't understand," Sophie said. "The investments Logan made, the ones that are causing problems now, they were in educational technology, programs to bring books and learning to underserved communities, just like your literacy program." Sophie felt tears in her eyes. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because my son stopped believing in fairy tales a long time ago. But when he's with you, I see that light in his eyes again, the same light my grandfather had when he talked about his first bookshop." "Alexander, stop this nonsense," Eleanor interrupted. "We're about to lose everything." "No," Alexander said firmly. "We're about to remember who we really are." He turned back to Sophie. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Sophie stood up, her mind made up. "I need to see Logan now." But when she pulled out her phone, she saw she had missed 6 calls from Maria and a text that made her heart stop. "Logan's at the store, and Rebecca's with him." "Sophie, it looks bad, really." "Bad?" Sophie's heart pounded as she rushed into her bookstore. The Saturday afternoon crowd had thinned out, leaving only a few customers browsing the shelves. But there, in the new reading corner, stood Logan and Rebecca. They were standing too close together, Rebecca's hand on Logan's arm. Maria intercepted Sophie before she could reach them. They've been here for 20 minutes, she whispered. She keeps talking about some merger deal. Sophie smoothed her dress, suddenly very aware that she was still wearing yesterday's makeup and hadn't even brushed her hair properly before rushing to meet Eleanor. "Logan," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "I wasn't expecting you. Today." He turned, and Sophie's heart clenched at how tired he looked. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his usually perfect suit was slightly rumpled. "Sophie," he said, stepping away from Rebecca. "Where were you? I've been trying to reach you." "She was at your parents' house," Rebecca answered, before Sophie could speak. "My father saw her going in earlier. Quite early for a social call, wasn't it?" Logan's eyes narrowed. "You went to see my parents, why?" "Your mother summoned me," Sophie said. "She wanted to discuss some things." "Did she now?" Logan's voice was dangerously quiet. "Logan, darling," Rebecca cut in smoothly, "we really need to finish our discussion. Daddy's offer won't stay on the table forever." "What offer?" Sophie asked, even though she already knew. Rebecca smiled, all perfect teeth and calculated warmth. "A merger between Hayes Industries and Sinclair Enterprises, of course. It's the perfect solution. Our companies have always been compatible, just like Logan and I were." "We're being the key word," Logan said sharply. "Oh, come on," Rebecca laughed. "This little romance with the bookstore girl was cute, but it's time to get serious. You're about to lose everything, Logan. My father's offer is more than generous." "And what exactly are the terms of this generous offer?" Sophie asked. Rebecca's smile turned cold. "That's between Logan and me. Business matters, you understand." "Actually," Logan said, "I'd like to hear what Sophie thinks." He turned to face her fully. "What did my mother say to you?" Sophie took a deep breath. "She told me to end things with you. She thinks I'm a distraction from what really matters, saving the company." "And what do you think matters?" "I think what matters is remembering why Hayes Industries started in the first place." Sophie's voice grew stronger. "Your great-grandfather didn't start with billions. He started with books, with believing that stories and education could change lives." Logan stared at her, something shifting in his expression. "Oh, please," Rebecca scoffed. "This isn't some romantic novel. This is business. Logan needs to think about his future, about his legacy." "That's exactly what I am thinking about," Logan said quietly. His eyes hadn't left Sophie's face. "My great-grandfather sold books door to door during the Depression because he believed in their power. My grandfather expanded the business, but never forgot those roots. My father built an empire," Rebecca interrupted. "An empire you're about to lose unless you listen to reason." But Logan wasn't listening to her anymore. He crossed the room to Sophie, taking her hands in his. "The educational technology programs," he said. "The ones everyone said were too risky. You knew about those?" Sophie nodded. "Your father told me. He said you were trying to bring the company back to its roots, back to believing in something bigger than profit. When did you become a business expert?" Rebecca's voice was sharp with anger. "She's not a business expert," Logan said, still looking at Sophie. "She's someone who understands what it means to believe in something, to fight for it, even when it's hard." Just then, Alexander Hayes walked into the store, followed by a group of men in suits. "Perfect timing, Father," Logan said. "I think I know how to save the company." "Logan," Rebecca warned, "think carefully about what you're about to do." "I have," he replied. "For the first time in years, I'm thinking clearly." He turned to the men in suits. "Gentlemen, I believe you're from the SEC. I have some information about irregular trading activities you might be interested in." Rebecca's face went pale. "You wouldn't dare." "Insider trading is a serious offense," one of the men said, stepping forward. "Miss Sinclair, I believe you, and your father should come with us to answer some questions." As Rebecca was led away, protesting loudly, Logan pulled Sophie into his arms. "I'm sorry," he whispered against her hair. "I'm sorry I ever made our relationship about business. I'm sorry I almost lost sight of what really matters." "Logan," Sophie pulled back slightly. "What about the company? The takeover?" Logan smiled, and for the first time in weeks, he looked like himself again. As it happens, I had a long talk with my father this morning about going back to basics, about remembering what Hays Industries was meant to be. Alexander stepped forward. We're restructuring the company, focusing on educational technology, digital libraries, literacy programs, the future of books and learning. And we need someone who understands that world. Sophie's eyes widened. What are you saying? I'm saying, Logan took her hands again, that I'd like to tear up our contract and write a new one. A real partnership, both in business and in life. That is, if you're interested. Sophie felt tears in her eyes. Are you sure? I'm just a bookstore owner. You're the woman who reminded me what's really important, Logan said softly. The woman I fell in love with, contract or no contract. Behind them, a small crowd had gathered. Store customers, employees, even a few people from the street who recognized Logan. Someone started clapping and soon everyone joined in. Well? Logan asked, his eyes twinkling. What do you say? Partners? Sophie's answer was to pull him down for a kiss, not caring about their audience. This wasn't for show, wasn't part of any contract. This was real, but their moment was interrupted by Maria's excited voice. Guys, you might want to see this. The news about Sinclair's insider trading is already breaking. Hays Industries stock is climbing. Sophie and Logan broke apart, laughing. See, Sophie said, fairy tales do come true sometimes. Only the ones worth fighting for, Logan replied, pulling her close again. Outside the bookstore, reporters were already gathering, drawn by the sight of Logan Hays and the breaking scandal. But inside, surrounded by books and the people they loved, Sophie and Logan had found something better than any business deal. They'd found their own story. The news of the Sinclair scandal exploded across Boston like wildfire. By Sunday morning, every newspaper and news channel was talking about it. James Sinclair and his daughter Rebecca had been using insider information to manipulate stock prices, not just with Hays Industries, but with several other companies. Sophie watched the coverage from Logan's penthouse, curled up on his couch with a cup of coffee. The headlines kept scrolling across the screen. Sinclair Enterprises CEO arrested. Hays Industries stock soars. Corporate scandal rocks Boston society. You should see what they're saying about us, Logan said, sitting beside her with his own coffee. He held up his phone, showing her a Society magazine's website. The headline read, Love Conquers All, How a Bookstore Owner Saved Boston's Biggest Fortune. Sophie groaned. They're making it sound like a movie. Well, it kind of is, Logan smiled. The ruthless businessman, the bookstore owner with a heart of gold. Don't forget the evil ex-girlfriend and the disapproving mother, Sophie added. Then immediately regretted mentioning Eleanor. Logan's smile faded slightly. About my mother. She was just trying to protect you, Sophie said quickly, in her own way. By trying to break us up? By making you feel like you weren't good enough? Logan shook his head. She was wrong, Sophie. About everything. Just then, Logan's phone rang. It was Olivia. Turn on Channel 7, she said excitedly. Mom's giving a press conference. They quickly switched channels. There was Eleanor Hays, standing at a podium in front of Hays Industries headquarters. She looked elegant as always, but something was different about her expression. As the wife of Hays Industries' chairman and mother of its CEO, Eleanor was saying, I want to address the events of the past few days. Our company was founded on principles of education and enlightenment. Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that. But thanks to my son Logan, and yes, thanks to Sophie Carter, we're finding our way back. Sophie sat up straighter, not believing what she was hearing. Eleanor continued, Ms. Carter's dedication to literature and education reminded us of our company's true mission. That's why I'm proud to announce that Hays Industries is launching a nationwide literacy initiative, partnering with independent bookstores to bring reading programs to underserved communities. Logan squeezed Sophie's hand. Did you know about this? Sophie shook her head, stunned. The program will be headed by Sophie Carter, Eleanor announced, whose expertise in community outreach and literacy programs makes her the perfect choice to lead this initiative. Tears filled Sophie's eyes. Was this Eleanor's way of apologizing? Furthermore, Eleanor smiled, and for once, it reached her eyes. I'm personally looking forward to helping Ms. Carter plan her wedding to my son. though I suspect she'll insist on having it in that charming bookstore of hers. Logan choked on his coffee. Did my mother just announce our engagement before I could propose? Sophie laughed through her tears. I think she did. Well, Logan set down his coffee and got down on one knee in front of the couch. I guess I better make it official before she announces our firstborn's name. Logan! Sophie's heart was racing. What are you doing? Something I should have done weeks ago. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. I've been carrying this around since the charity ball, waiting for the right moment. Sophie Carter, you turned my carefully planned business arrangement into the best thing that ever happened to me. You reminded me what it means to believe in something bigger than profit margins. You made me fall in love with books again, and more importantly, with you. Sophie could barely breathe as he opened the box, revealing a vintage-style ring with a deep blue sapphire surrounded by diamonds. It was my grandmother's, Logan said softly. She was a teacher before she married my grandfather. She would have loved you. Logan, marry me, Sophie. Be my partner in everything, life, love, business. Help me make Hayes Industries something my great-grandfather would be proud of. Help me write our own story. Sophie slid off the couch to kneel with him on the floor. You know this means all our children will be bookworms, right? Logan's face lit up. Is that a yes? Yes, Sophie laughed, tears running down her cheeks. Of course it's a yes. As Logan slipped the ring onto her finger, his phone started buzzing with messages. The first was from Maria. Your mother-in-law just announced your engagement on live TV, also I better be maid of honor. We should probably call your parents, Sophie said, admiring how the sapphire caught the light. Already done, came Eleanor's voice from the doorway. They looked up to see Eleanor and Alexander standing there, champagne bottles in hand. Mother. Logan stood, helping Sophie up. How did you get in? I have a key for emergencies, Eleanor said smoothly. And announcing, my son's engagement on live television seemed like an emergency that required immediate champagne. And an apology, she added, turning to Sophie. I was wrong about you, my dear, very wrong. I hope you can forgive an old woman who sometimes forgets that love is more important than social status. Sophie hugged her future mother-in-law, feeling the older woman's surprise and then her warm response. Besides, Eleanor whispered in her ear, you handle the press better than any society debutante I've ever seen. Alexander was already opening the champagne. To the future of Hayes Industries, he toasted, and to love stories that begin in bookstores. As they celebrated, Sophie looked around at her new family. Alexander with his proud smile, Eleanor already making wedding plans on her phone, and Logan, her Logan, looking at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. The contract that had brought them together was probably still in her desk drawer at the store. She made a mental note to frame it. After all, it was the beginning of their story. But the real story, the one they would tell their children someday, was about how love could turn even the most carefully planned business arrangement into something magical.